Pleasure to see all of you this morning. Glad that we can be together and worship God as His Word directs. We are in our readings this morning. We are in Joel and Amos. So if you have your Old Testaments, we'll briefly go through that. This is a section of the Scripture called what kind of prophets? Minor. And why are they called minor? They were what?
They were minors.
They were minors. Yeah. Thank you. Where'd he go? Oh, thank you.
What number are we on this? On the bottom? What number on our little paper, please?
The 20th, which was Hosea 8 through 14, number 263. Is that what you got? And
Yes, sir.
okay, then so that was 263 on the 20th, and so the Thursday, Friday, and yes would be Joel and Amos. Let me do this real quickly. I dropped it, and so these are called the minor prophets. And what was that, Brother Gene? That they were because they were minors. What?
The length of the books.
That's right. The length is minor in contrast to the major prophets, whose length a tremendously amount longer. You take Isaiah. Isaiah is longer in one book than all the minor prophets put together. All right. So Joel is difficult to know exactly when Joel was written. Possibly when Jehoiada set Joash on the throne, but in a nutshell, God, and this goes back to the fact that when God promised Israel that if they were obedient to Him physical promises would come to pass, and so they weren't. And so, what is the main curse that's brought on the people during the book of Joel? Locusts. Locusts would destroy their crops. And devastation of land by that. And then in chapter 2, though, he pictures a time when God would pour out His favor. In fact, He would pour out of His Spirit on all flesh. We used to, young people, and I do it to old people as well, older. If you think in relation to the Old Testament and physical Judah and Israel, Joel was the locust prophet. In respect to the New Testament, he's what, Paul? The Pentecost prophet, because when the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on the apostles was such that what meaneth this? And some said, well, they're full of new wine. We're not drunk, as you suppose. It's the third hour of the day. But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. This, what you're seeing and hearing, was predicted. And then he quotes from Joel 2:28 through about 31, where God would pour forth of His Spirit on all flesh. And so we have that answer to that in the second chapter, or at least the prediction of it. In chapter 3, while nations would all be judged on whom they were trying to rely, eventually Judah would be judged, and then Judah would return, yet it would not be the physical return that he speaks of, but the what? The spiritual return under the Messiah. All right, then we go to the book of Amos. Amos, we do have a date mentioned in verse 1. It was a herdsman of Tekoa during the days of who? Uzziah. Yes, and in the days of Jeroboam. So that marks it somewhere around 755 BC. And Amos talks about the approaching judgment on really the Gentiles as well as on Israel's sins in the first couple of chapters. And then in chapter 3, Israel would be punished. In chapter 4, what do we find? earlier punishments God had inflicted were very helpful on them, right?
No, Israel doesn't return.
They don't return. That's right. And they're encouraged to seek the Lord. I'm looking at chapter 5, verse 5. Seek the Lord, and ye shall live, lest he break out like fire in the house of Jehovah, and it devour, and there be none to quench it in Bethel. Ye who turn justice into wormwood, cast down righteousness to the earth. That was a common refrain. They were basically like a whole lot of countries around about them. Not much different. Inequities, injustices, righteousness was not a premium. It was actually on the back burner, and if you could buy your sentence, then that's what would happen. And he pictures the day of the Lord coming, Israel being punished in 7, the number of visions, and then their final destruction, that is the northern kingdom's destruction, Israel's destruction, is pictured in chapter 8. Verse 11 is a passage we've used often insofar as putting together the time eras of the Bible story. The days will come, saith the Lord, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine for bread or thirst for water, but of hearing the word of the Lord. That was a prediction of the years of what? The years of silence. Exactly right. And so God basically would write them off for about 400 years and would not send any prophets to them. And all of this was unavoidable due to their tremendous sins. The latter part of 8. And then in 9, they would be restored, but it would be not... Well, they would come back, but the final restoration... Look in verse 11. This is 9, verse 11. In that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up its ruins and build it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations, plural, that are called by my name. Do you have a marginal reading that shows you where that's used in the New Testament? Acts 15. There you go. And on that occasion, you remember in Acts 15, the problem was whether or not Gentiles had to be circumcised, keep the law. There were problems. Paul, Barnabas, Titus, certain others went to Jerusalem, and they had that conference. And Peter spoke first, and then Paul and Barnabas spoke second. James spoke third, and he used this passage. He used this passage to indicate that God intended for what? Who? The Gentiles to be included. He used this passage exactly and concluded that God wanted the Gentiles to be a part of that. All right, isn't it interesting when we kind of read through in a fairly rapid rate so many of these little passages that are alluded to in the New Testament that include the Gentiles and the fact that God wants everybody saved. All right, comment, question? All right, let's move over to Luke 10. We're about to finish Luke 10, and we'll go to that in just a moment. Years of what? First section of the life of Jesus. Preparation, followed by beginning ministry. And you always remember that it actually began when Jesus was about how old? 30, Luke 3, and at the event of his baptism at the hands of John, followed by his temptation, early disciples called there in the early chapters of John. All right, John has been up in Enon near Salem. He's been captured or imprisoned. Jesus goes up, and then we have, after the beginning ministry, the great Galilean ministry. Better part of how many years? About 2, that's right. And then the people are following him for wrong reasons, and he needs to spend more time with the apostles, so we have periods of retirement, about 6 months. Then he's set his face to Jerusalem, Luke 9:50, and then he come down, and now we're in Judea and Perea, and we're having we came early on, and we've come down, and we found that Luke and John are primarily the accounts of the gospel. Luke in Judea, Perea, some in Jerusalem, right outside, for instance, where we know that Martha and Mary were in the city of Bethany, which was right outside of Jerusalem. And Luke records that at the end of Luke 10. But nonetheless, primarily Luke records in these two regions, and then John primarily in the city of Jerusalem. So when we come down to the Feast of Tabernacles, John 7, it's the fall of the year, and we have the events there, great excitement, division over Jesus, the entrapment of the adulteress. He's the light of the world, and then my father versus your father, the man who's healed, who was blind from birth. And then on the heels of that, Jesus comparing himself to the good shepherd in contrast to the thieves, the robbers, and the H word, hirelings. Yes. And then we move over to Luke, the mission of the 70. They're sent out, they return, and they are so happy because...
The spirits were subject.
That's right. The spirits are subject. However, Jesus said, in this don't rejoice, but rejoice rather that your names are written in heaven. And then after that, he prays for them and thanks God that the wise and that the babes had understood that, and so on. And then we talked about the parable of the Samaritan, and we ended there. We went over this last Sunday morning. I'll go through quickly and get to my next charts. The parable of the Samaritan, we emphasized this Wednesday night. The personal reading and understanding of the law. What question did the lawyer ask Jesus? What? Exactly. Jesus answered, what is written in the law? How do you read it? And then he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind. Second, your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus said, what? This do, and you'll live. But he, seeking to justify himself, said, who is my neighbor? Leading to the parable that follows. And so several things we emphasized, and I don't apologize for just reviewing it briefly, that the law could be read, could be understood, could be obeyed. Contrary to what people say about the Bible today. Well, it means different things to different people. It does when you mishandle it. But truth is of the nature that it can be understood. The law, not traditions. What is written in the law, not what have the Pharisees been saying or what did Rabbi Hillel say. And one's own reading and doing are necessary, not someone else's. This do, and thou shalt live. The practice of the law, not just theorizing about it. And then we pointed out that the golden rule is really illustrated. The iron rule, might makes right, that's illustrated by the robber who left the fellow half dead. The thief, the Levite and the priest represented people going by basically the silver rule. If you don't hurt me, I won't hurt you. If you haven't helped me, I won't help you. And then the Samaritan is the one who really practices what was part of the law. That if even your enemy, you see an ox or an ass gone astray, you bring that back to him. So the Samaritan was the one who illustrated who is my neighbor. He answered the question, who is my neighbor? Some make the point, that when Jesus asked the question, which of these three thinkest thou proved neighbor unto him that fell among the robbers, that he didn't use the word Samaritan. He just said, he that showed mercy on him. Well, that was right. If he was afraid to use the word Samaritan, it might have been, I'm not certain. Did we answered all of our questions on B, did we not? Okay, so we're ready for the visit with Mary and Martha, right? Okay, let's read it together. It's just a very short, and there's so much insight in this that really plays into John 11 and 12, where we have Mary and Martha and Lazarus mentioned again. Lazarus is not here. Really, if you would let's read that paragraph. Luke 10:38 through the end. Luke 10:38 through the end.
Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister named called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she approached him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed. And Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her.
All right. They come to a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. Now, we do learn a little later where, keep your finger there. Turn over to John, the 11th chapter. John 11. John 11. This is the chapter that deals with Jesus raising who from the dead? Lazarus from the dead. And you'll notice in verse 1, a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, of the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was that Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. And then Lazarus dies. And then we have a conversation between Mary and Jesus and Martha and Jesus in verses 17 and following. And it's obvious. I'm looking at verse 20. Well, look at verse 22. Well, let's back up to 20. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary still sat in the house. You get the picture. Mary is more contemplative thinker. Martha's more active. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother had not died. Now, that gives a tremendous reflection of her faith in the Lord. She knew that he could heal her. So it's not a case that she was faithless and her sister was faithful. She had faith. And even now, listen to verse 22. Even now I know that whatsoever thou shalt ask of God, God will give thee. That's great confidence. Jesus saith unto her, your brother shall rise again. Martha said, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. What does that express? Faith. Faith in the resurrection. Faith that Jesus could not only raise him from the dead, and faith and confidence that there's going to be a resurrection in the last day. So she and Mary both were extremely insightful into Jesus' teaching. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth on me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth on me shall never die. Believest thou this? She, that's Martha, yea, Lord, I have believed that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, even he that cometh into the world. And when she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, the teacher is here and calleth thee. And so then they go together. Verse 31, the Jews then who were with her in the house and were consoling her, when they saw Mary, that she rose up quickly and went out, followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Mary, therefore, when she came where Jesus was and saw him, fell down at his feet, saying, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Did they both believe the same thing? Yes, same phrase. And so that's when Jesus sees her weeping. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He hurt humanly. In a book that emphasizes Jesus' deity, here John includes all that was in him from a human point of view. And so and then we find, in the next verse, Jesus wept. All that Jesus was from a deity point of view did not prevent his understanding the human condition. He wept. And so verse 39, take away the stone. Martha's thinking about, Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said, Lord, by this time the body decays. Some of your translation says the body stinketh, doesn't it? He stinketh. For he hath been dead 4 days. And then, so the rest of it, he says with a loud voice, verse 43, Lazarus, come forth. He that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and so on. And verse 45, many therefore of the Jews who came to Mary and beheld that which he did believed on him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees, told them. And it ends up in chapter 12 that the Pharisees are, if they had their way, they'd put what? They put Lazarus to death, get rid of the evidence, prima facie evidence. But anyway, I wanted to bring that to you. We'll notice in 12, just keep reading with me. Verse 1, Jesus therefore 6 days before the Passover came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus raised from the dead. So they made him a supper there, and who served? Martha. But Lazarus was one of them that sat at meat with him. What did Mary do? Yes, she took a pound of ointment of pure nard, very precious, anointed the feet of Jesus, wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the odor. Judas said, oh, this could have been sold for 300 shillings and given to the poor. And John records he didn't say that because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. He was basically the treasurer. He held the bag, and Jesus said, suffer her to keep it against the day of my burial. I want you to think, if you still have Luke 10, go back to Mark 14. Mark 14, and then we'll go back to Luke 10. I'm just wanting to get a picture of these women because the Bible paints a really beautiful picture of these ladies. In Mark 14, this account's also in Matthew 26 and Luke's account. In Mark 14, verse 3, while he was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster cruse of ointment. Well, we don't know who that is here, but we do in John. Who was it? It was Mary. And she broke the cruse and poured it over his head. Some had indignation. Who led the some who had indignation according to John's account? Judas. For this ointment might have been sold for above 300 shillings and given, and they murmured against her. That would be Mary. But Jesus said, let her alone, why trouble ye her? Here is the passage I really want to emphasize. She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor always with you, whensoever ye will, ye can do them good. But me you have not always. She hath done what she could. She hath anointed my body beforehand for the burying. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever the gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, that also which this woman hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her. Of whom does Jesus speak? Mary. In that passage right there, it's obvious. Mary understood Jesus was going to what? Die. And it's almost like, I'm not sure if I can help his body later, but I'm going to do for him right now while I have opportunity to do it. And Jesus commended her. Now, let's go back to Luke 10. When you read those passages in John 11 and John 12, Mark 14, and then we go back to Luke 10, we can put together a pretty good picture of the character studies of these two sisters, a little bit about Lazarus. That must have been just a tremendous family, little family that Jesus obviously loved, and who loved Jesus. And whatever Jesus said, did Martha seldom listen? No. She even believed in what? According to John 11, the resurrection. She believed in the miracles of Jesus. She knew that he could do it. But even among people who are spiritually thinking, there can be someone who does a little bit more. True or false? True. And so Martha, while she's listening, she's got her hands kind of in the dishes, and Luke 10, maybe in the oven, and she's thinking, why doesn't he tell her to come over here and help me? We can listen in a few minutes. And Jesus does not, back in Luke 10, Jesus does not cater to Martha on this case. He said, rather, Martha, you are cumbered about with many things. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good part that will what? Not be taken away from her. The one portion. And so Jesus really balances the two. Was Martha doing something good? Certainly she was. And right. It's not a matter of right and wrong. It's a matter of doing something that's right, but doing something that's even what? Better. And that's where you have to look at the balances of that. Yes, sir, Len?
You know, one thing, and you made a wonderful point, that what Mary was doing, she realized that he was going to die.
Yes.
So she was taking care of that. But she gave the very best
Yeah.
to him. And I think that there's a lesson for us.
Yes.
That we need to give our very best. Because when you start talking about the ointment that you use being in an alabaster flask,
Yes.
which is of high value,
Yeah.
you know, that 300 denarii is
300
about
days'
300
worth.
days
Mhm.
of wages.
Exactly.
When you start thinking about all these things, she really
Yeah.
realized
Yes.
what was going to happen, who he was, giving her best. And I think there's a tremendous lesson in
Yes.
it for us.
I believe that's right. The very fact that she broke that alabaster, it's alabaster, it was expensive. She broke evidently the neck of it. She broke the flask, indicated it could not be used anymore. It would be poured, and she poured it all out on him. And remember, the fragrance filled the room.
About a pound's worth,
Yeah.
which is not quite our pound,
Yeah.
about 11.5 ounces or so, but still, it's just,
When
that's
I,
a lot.
when I started dating Lee, I found out how much real perfume cost. And it's not cheap if you get something that's nice. But 300 denarii. Now I don't know if Judas was shading that sum or what. But if you were accurate about that, 300 days' wages, you take Matthew 20 as your equivalent, where this master bargained with these workers for a denarii a day. That was a common day's labor. So you take a common day's labor for one day, that would be equal to 1 shilling or 1 denarii. Multiply that by 300 days, you got the better part of a year's wages. That's thousands of dollars. And she's putting it on Jesus. And, why in the world are you doing that? This could have been sold and given to the poor. That'd really make Judas look good, wouldn't it? Oh, Judas, bless his heart. Brother Judas, he's so concerned about the poor. Did you see what he said? He shouldn't have done that. And Jesus didn't commend Judas. He commended Mary. She's done what she could. She's prepared my body aforetime for burial. Let's go back to Luke 10, though. When we put all that together, Jesus comes to her house, to Martha's house. Maybe she had a house, Mary had a house, and we just don't know all those details. And she received him. And then all of a sudden the scene shifts in 39. Mary is sitting at the Lord's feet, hearing his word. And Martha, there are 3 words that are here that describe Martha. What is it in verse 40? Distracted. Your King James, Brother Richard, says what? Cumbered? Cumbered, yeah. I'm sorry?
Cumbered about many servants.
Yes. Some of the older translations say cumbered. Most of the newer ones say distracted. And then what 2 words are used to describe Martha in verse 41? Anxious or careful. Does the King James say careful, Brother Richard? Yeah, I thought it did. The word anxious is the newer word. What do some of your other translations have? Worried. And then the second word? Troubled. Yes. Did any of you have disturbed or distracted for that? What was that, Angela? Bothered. Yes, bothered. Those 3 words, if you look those up, it's extremely interesting words. 2 of the 3 are nowhere else used in the New Testament. They're used only here. And the one word, anxious, is the same word that's used over in Matthew 6 several times, where Jesus said, don't be anxious concerning what you'll wear, what you'll eat, and so on. God feeds the lilies of the field. He feeds the birds of the air. Won't he feed you? And then, be not anxious, therefore, for the morrow will take care of the things of itself. It's used 4 or 5 times in Matthew 6. It's used in other times. But that word anxious gives I've jotted them down. The first, cumbered, means to be drawn away, to be distracted. The second word, anxious, means full of care or concern, distracted. And then the word troubled, the last word in the American Standard, also carries with it the idea of distracted or bothered, only here. And that distracted or bothered, it gives it the idea that I just don't, it's like, we sometimes we'll talk about wringing our hands. We just don't know what's going to happen. And we're just so, minds racing and we can't ever focus on one thing. That seems to be the meaning behind those words that are used here. Okay, so let's answer our question. As Jesus was passing through Judea, they came to a certain village where Martha received him into her house. From John 11, we know that the village was called Bethany, right, about 2 miles from Jerusalem, east slope of the Mount of Olives. Who sat at Jesus' feet listening? Mary. Yet Martha was distracted or cumbered as she was busy making preparations. She came to the Lord and asked him to tell Mary to do what? Yeah, bid her to help me. That request implies Mary would not listen to her request. That is, Mary did not listen to Martha's request, evidently. Jesus chided Martha, told her that she was worried and troubled or anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. That's a great little word study. If you go back and you look at how the word one is used, one thing is necessary. You remember the lawyer who came to Jesus, the rich young ruler. And Jesus said, one thing thou lackest. One thing thou lackest. How many things caused Moses to lose entrance into Canaan? One. One unforgiven sin. We want to make sure that we don't let any one thing get between us and the Lord. And I'm not saying that in this case Martha let one thing get in her way, because we've already established she had faith, confidence in the Lord. But on this occasion, she was distracted and let herself be distracted. One thing is needful. Mary has chosen the what? The good part, yeah. And I've got under the note there, under usual circumstances, what Martha did was not wrong. In fact, it was commendable. However, given the opportunity to listen to Jesus' teaching, she chose to do something that was inferior. She chose the physical over spiritual. Jesus emphasized to her, emphasis is this: of the two things you could be doing, listening to me or preparing a meal, only one thing really matters when those two are compared. The good part, Jesus mentioned, likely refers to the portion of honor given to the special guest at a banquet. Jesus uses the phrase to describe food when he said one thing is needful. That is, he used it, but he applied it to something else. He contrasted the spiritual nourishment, food, to the physical food, and said Mary had chosen the good part, the spiritual over the physical. It's interesting that in this part of Luke's record, Jesus emphasizes the need to do in the parable of the Samaritan, and the need to hear in the account with Mary and Martha. And the overall teaching of the New Testament is that one must be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. We're to hear the word, but not just a hearer and a doer. Think of at least two circumstances where you, like Mary and Martha, have a choice between doing something that is right and helpful, but inferior to hearing the word taught. Anybody? How could I be doing something that's good, but then there's something better going on? Janet, you look like you want to say something.
No, I was thinking maybe that you did some charitable deed, but it was time to go to worship.
Yeah.
Instead of going to worship, you did some charitable deed.
Yeah, and it's good, but this is required at this time. Brother Gardner Hall, when I was growing up, had a ladies' Bible class on Wednesday mornings for years, and Brother Hiram Hutto continued it. And I went to it a time or two. It was not just for ladies, they called it that, but men, retired men, some kids, some of us who were out for summer vacation would go. And I would hear some say, well, I've got a lot of laundry to do. And I even as a young person, and hearing that passage read and taught, I thought, that's exactly what he's talking about. You've got laundry to do, cooking to do at home, other things, errands to run, bills to pay. And yet here's this over here. And in the two, when they're compared, which should take precedence? If you've got a choice, you know. And it's not wrong and right, it's good and best, or good and better. I had some ideas on this. We mentioned this in the note. The overall emphasis is the need to hear the word. The parable of the Samaritan emphasized the need to do. Years ago, I want to call your attention to something. If you find it interesting to do it in your Bible. It's interesting, if you look back in my Bible, it's over here on the left page and right column. In verse 23, turning to the disciples, Jesus said privately, "Blessed are your eyes which see the things ye see. For I say unto you, many prophets and kings desired to see the things which ye see and saw them not, to hear the things which you hear and heard them not." In other words, you have a tremendous what that others have not had? Opportunity. You have opportunities. You have advantages that others have not had. And then you think, see, hear, do, and then you have the certain lawyer who says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? How read it out? And then he told him, this do, and you'll live. And then when it comes down to Mary and Martha, notice in verse 39, she sat at the Lord's feet and what? She heard his word. Now you think back to what we just read back over in 23 and 24. She basically was making good use of her opportunities. And what Jesus said, wise men and kings long to hear the things which you hear, see the things that you see, and heard them not, saw them not. So here's the opportunity to hear, to see Jesus. Mary took it, and Martha was distracted at that time. It's a great point. You know, there are a lot of people who be baptized, and they're members of the church. But there ought to be a growth for all of us, and a growth where we're focused more and more on the Word, more on Jesus and God and His will, to the point that the more focused we are, the less we allow things to distract us. We hear about members of the church, well, you know, they're down on the river, they're doing this on Sunday, and you think, well, they just hadn't learned what it means to be converted. But we go on from there, and we ought to grow, and we ought to get to that point where we just hate anything that distracts us from giving our full attention to the Lord when we need to do that. I've told you before, but if you've forgotten, I want to remind you, because it made such an impression on me. Probably from 1968 or 9 till he died in 75, I sat right next to my granddaddy, my hero, and between him and my grandmother, actually. And they're about 7 rows from the front. I can see this and I was saying, Papa, about this and that. I was just talking to Papa, and somebody got up to make announcements. He didn't say a word. He just kind of did this and pointed. And in other words, it's time to start. It's time to forget about all this. I got the point in a heartbeat. Just pointed, just kind of nudged me a little and pointed. He didn't say a word. And those two things said thousands of words. This is what's important. We'll talk later. And it's not, well, let's finish right now real quickly. No, stop. And it's just a matter of this is significant now. This is most important in my life now, versus letting other things go. So that's one thing. Comment, question?
Without those opportunities, we won't
We don't, David. You're exactly right. We've got to. I think back. Oh, I could kick myself. I could, and that just wouldn't hurt, wouldn't help it any. But I had some. When I was in my early teens, I had some valuable opportunities with Brother Hutto that I just didn't think it was significant. And you can't go back. I tried to make some of it up. But once you have those, you talk about, I made the point about some members of the church with others. It wouldn't matter if the Apostle Paul, we announced Paul is going to come here incarnate. He's going to come here and he's going to preach on the book of Romans and explain and answer any questions you have. That there be members of the church that have other things to do. And that's what you have. It wouldn't matter who it is. Because even with Jesus, Martha, as good a lady as she was caught up with some other things. And there was a little bit of a chiding on his part. And anyway,
So,
yes, sir.
do you think this was a public rebuke in front of the whole crowd, or do you think this was private word between Jesus and Martha? I don't think Martha would have come in front of the whole crowd of people there while she was doing her duty.
Yeah.
She felt like she needed some help, and she mentioned it to Jesus. Obviously, he was in charge of the assembly.
I don't know.
And
I don't know.
I think it was a private rebuke. And
I wouldn't know one way or the
the-
other.
The simple message is some things are more important than chores on earth.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
you know, we get that message when Jesus said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven."
Exactly.
You know, whatever priorities we may have, God seems
That-
require our attention,
Exactly.
and you know, we all fail in that aspect.
There's something that comes first before anything else. Yeah.
You know, if you schedule, you know, we run our lives by a clock.
Yes.
And appointments and seeing people and doing things. And you just have to, when things are scheduled for God, you make sure nothing interferes with that, and make some extra opportunities.
Yes. I'll give you another personal illustration. I hope you don't mind it. When I was about 13, when I was 13 or 14, I was almost as tall as I am now. I could do anything physically. And my granddaddy's and grandmother's house needed painting. And it didn't have a whole lot. It had, you know, gutters and the eaves and so on. But my granddaddy was going to let me do it. He was going to help me, but and he was going to pay me a little bit, you know. But and so it'd be, you know, scraping and it just so happened that we had a meeting going on, kind of like we do in June, you know. And I was out of school, perfect time, finished with school. Let's get on it. He said, Philip, let's wait. We've got to meet. I said, Papa, I can do it early in the morning, take off a couple hours. He said, no, it's kind of distracting through the week. I think it's more distracting for him. But whatever the case was, we put it off a whole week. That made an impression on me. You know, there are a lot of things, guys. I can't remember what I wore yesterday. A lot of things. I have problems more with names of people, little people sometimes. But those kinds of things stuck. That there are things that you just don't let get in the way of the spiritual. I'm going to go through these briefly with you. Again, Jesus showed the difference between good things to do and the best thing to do when there's a decision between the two. Not between wrong and right, but between right and what's best. And then the three words used to describe Martha: she was cumbered, only here in the New Testament, drawn away, distracted, anxious, careful. A synonym could be distracted, but it carries with it more the idea of worried, anxiety. And the King James using the word careful, full of care. I'm just so concerned about that, I'm not sure what would happen. And it's used in those passages that we already mentioned. In fact, in chapter 10, when Jesus told the apostles, when they bring you before kings and in councils, don't be anxious what you say or how you'll say it. It will be given to you. Don't be concerned about getting your lesson up. And then the word troubled, bothered, worried, upset, only here in the New Testament. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, do you think Mary had those problems? If not, why? Do you think she had the same problem Martha did, at least at this time? No. She was just sitting there all absorbed in what Jesus was saying. You know, there's a time to be busy and doing our work, but there's time to think. Sit, think, and read and think about, and there's a time for that also. Comment, David, you look like you wanted to say something.
I was just thinking about David and meditating on the word.
Yes.
Thinking about it.
Yes. Oh, that you reminded me. And I thought about it a while ago, but the Psalm, I think it's in Psalm 42. One thing, it's on the right-hand page. Oh, brother. One thing, the Lord will desire. One thing that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Behold the beauty of the Lord. Here it is, 27:4. 27:4. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. One thing have I asked. One thing, more important than anything, to be among the Lord's people, to me in the Lord's house. It's a beautiful passage right there. Comment or question? All right, Lord willing, we'll start with Luke 11 Wednesday night, and the prayer that the Lord has asked. Lord, teach us to pray, even as John taught his disciples.